What's up, guys? Nate Morris, Master LSAT. Nice to see you all. I apologize. I know I've been kind of inactive on this channel recently, but I am working very hard on making video explanations for the three most recent LSATs, and specifically PrepTest 93, which was very recently released, I believe just a couple weeks ago. I'm working on having full video explanations for that, which will be available hopefully shortly on masterlsat.com. In the meantime, I do want to take a few of those questions and make them available on YouTube as well. And so if you have any specific questions from PrepTest 93 that you want me to post videos for, definitely let me know in the comments and I will do my best to get those posted. Otherwise, I'm just going to take some of the questions that I know people seem to have had trouble with and post explanations for those. And just to clarify, in case you didn't know, this test is available for free with your free LSAC account. You can log in to your LSAC account and you'll see that you should have free access to this test, PT93, the most recent LSAT that has been released to date. And if you haven't already, I would encourage you to work through the test on your own, do the best that you can, and then you can use my videos to explain and to clarify all the questions that you had trouble with. So without further ado, in this video, we're going to start with Logical Reasoning Section 2, an early on question that seemed to give people a little bit of trouble, which was number 3. Number 3, which of the following would most logically complete the argument? Let's read the argument, see if we can come up with anything. Although there are immediate short-term gains in crop yield from applying certain hydrocarbon-based pesticides to fields on which they have not been previously used, in other words, using these pesticides for the first time on a field, sounds like there's immediate short-term gains in crop yield. So although that's true, though, studies have shown clearly that long-term use, so once you keep using it over the long term, that gradually depresses crop yield from this initially elevated level. In other words, the first year you use it, you're going to get a huge spike in crop yield, and then over time, if you keep using it, it's going to gradually decrease from that initially elevated level. We should therefore conclude that use of these pesticides, what? It's hard to come up with anything new here other than it's just going to kind of summarize what we just said, which is that they're going to be initially profitable right away, but then over time, it's going to be less and less profitable in terms of how much you're gaining in terms of the crop yield. Now, that doesn't mean that it's a bad idea. It doesn't mean that it's a waste of money, and it doesn't mean that you're going to end up losing more than you gained. It's always good when you're reading things on the LSAT to think about not just what it does imply, but think about what it doesn't imply. But kind of seems like it might be implying, but it's not implying that. That's very often going to be a bunch of the wrong answers, right? The things that it kind of seems like it's almost saying, but it's not saying. It's not saying that it's a bad idea to do this. In fact, it sounds like it's going to make you a lot of extra crops, right? It sounds like it's good. It's just that over time, that extra amount of crops that it's making is going to go down and down. But it sounds like it's still making you more crops, yielding more crops than it would have had you not used this pesticide, right? It's just that the first year, let's say you had a 20% increase in crop yield, but then it says years after that, long-term use depresses it from that initially elevated level. So it's going to go down from 20% to 18% to 16% to 12%. Now, maybe it'll eventually go back down to 0, in which case that's what it was making anyway, but it was still a profitable decision because you made all those extra crops in the meantime. Maybe it does go under 0. Maybe it goes to -2, -10%, -50%. In other words, maybe it does end up being not economical to do, but we don't know. We just know that you're going to make a profit. You're going to make a lot of extra crops the first year, and then however many extra crops you make, it's going to gradually go down from there. That's all we know. So let's look for an answer that characterizes that, because we don't know any more than that. We just know that it's going to make a lot of extra crops at the beginning, but then it's going to gradually decrease from there. A is kind of the trick answer that I was alluding to when we broke down the paragraph, which is that you don't know that this was not economical, right? Uneconomic means not profitable. It means you lost more than you gained. It was not something that was profitable. We don't know that. It sounds like it was profitable, right? It sounds like we had immediate short-term gains, and then it just sounds like those gains gradually depressed from that initially elevated level. But it still sounds like we made more crops, we yielded more crops than we would have had we never used the pesticide. Uneconomic would have to mean that we gained, but then we lost more than we gained. That would be uneconomical, right? Is if you gained 5% crops, but then over the span of 10 years, you lost 20% of your crops. Well, that would mean that it was an ultimate loss rather than a gain. That would be uneconomic. It sounds like we gained. It doesn't say explicitly, but it sounds at least very likely in this case that, at least possible, that you gain more than you lost because you gained a lot. And then it just says those gains gradually fell from that elevated level, but it still sounds like you're gaining here. So there's no evidence that it's uneconomic. Therefore, A is not supported by this paragraph. B says that the use of these pesticides is bad for the environment. There's no indication of that in this paragraph. The paragraph doesn't say anything about how it affects the environment, right? Even though that's what our minds go to in real life when we think of pesticides damage the environment. That's sort of a reflex that we have when we think about pesticides and the environment. But this paragraph didn't tell us that, right? This paragraph doesn't say anything about effect on the environment. It only is talking about effect on crop yields, right? On how much crop we can make from this field, right, as a result of doing this. It doesn't say anything about how it impacts the environment. Therefore, B is not the right answer. C says that using these pesticides is going to eventually make pest problems impossible to manage. Now, that doesn't sound like anything that our paragraph suggested, right? Our paragraph did say that it's eventually going to be the case that the elevated level of crop yields that we're going to get from using these pesticides, in other words, it's going to go up, let's say 20%, but then that initially elevated level is going to gradually depress. It's going to go down to 19% the next year, and then 18% gains the following year, and then only 17%. But it doesn't say anything about making pest problems unmanageable, right? It doesn't sound like that is supported by anything in this paragraph. Therefore, C is wrong. D says that using these pesticides is probably not in accordance with what the manufacturer's instructions are saying to do. Now, this paragraph didn't tell you anything about what the manufacturers are instructing to do, and therefore I have no idea whether it's occurring. And by the way, it also doesn't tell us anything about the way that it's occurring, right? It just says that if you use these pesticides, in the short term you get a gain, in the long term that gain diminishes, right? But I don't know whether people are using these pesticides in real life. I don't know the way that they're using it, and I don't know how the manufacturers instruct people to use it. So I don't know either of these two things. D is saying the way that it's being used is not the same as the way the manufacturers are instructing it to be used. I don't know either of those two things. So therefore, how on earth am I going to know that they are different from each other? Therefore, D is definitely unsupported. E is pretty spot on. It's kind of just summing up the paragraph. It's just saying that using these pesticides gives financial returns that diminish over time. Now, why financial returns? Well, because it's making you grow more crops than you would have. So it makes sense. You're going to have more things, more crops, more of anything than you would have had otherwise. That sounds like it's a financial return. It's a profit. And it literally says it diminishes over time, right? That initially elevated level is going to be gradually depressed over time. So it's going to give you, let's say, 20% yield the first year, extra 20% of crops that you wouldn't have made otherwise had you not used that pesticide. And then it says it diminishes over time, right? Because the next year, you keep using it in the long term, it's going to be only 19% and then 17% and then 12%. But you're still making more than you would have otherwise. It's just that those gains are diminishing over time. That's exactly summarizing what this paragraph is saying. And I know that some people had trouble with A on this question, but A is kind of a more extreme version of E. E just says you're going to make extra profit. It's just that profit's going to go down over time. A goes a step further. A says not only is the profit going to go down over time, it's going to go so far down that you're going to end up losing more money than you gained, losing more crops than you gained, right? So A is a more extreme version of E. That's a good way to know that A is not the answer. When you're doing an inference question, you always want to shy away from the more extreme answers, even though A sounds very innocent, right? It's just one word, economic, right? And E is more words. So it kind of sounds like, just based on the number of words, you have this irrational instinct that maybe E is going more out on a limb than A. But A actually is going way further than E. A is saying that you're going to end up losing money. Uneconomic means you lose more than you gain. Versus E is saying, no, you're gaining. It's just that those gains are diminishing over time. So that's a more conservative version. That is what's actually supported by this paragraph, and therefore that's the right answer. And just as a general tip, always err on the side of the more conservative answer when you're dealing with inferences, because it's always easier to make a more mild, more conservative inference rather than one that goes too far. If you found this video useful, don't forget to hit subscribe. And for thousands more clear LSAT explanation videos, go to masterlsat.com.